I'm Ralph, so welcome back to part 2 in our series on cams. As I said before, I'm not an expert and numbers may vary a little tiny bit. I'm not trying to be overly technical. I'm just trying to give you an idea about lift and duration and a little bit about cams and how they work. So if you enjoy this, be sure to subscribe, like, ring the bell, do those sort of things. It keeps our channel going and we really appreciate it. So when the crank rod is up to the top, they call that top dead center, and when it's at the bottom, it's called bottom dead center. So once we're up to the top, and as the piston starts going down to what's called bottom dead center, the intake valve opens and gases are drawn into the cylinder by the vacuum created. So basically when the piston is going down, it's drawing gases into the motor through the intake valve opening. The intake valve is larger because it requires a lot more air and fuel to be drawn in by the downward pressure of the stroke. And we only have atmospheric pressure on the outside and such, so it can't push it down in. It has to be sucked down in. So it does that and pulls that down in through there. And that is pulling them in, pulling them in. The exhaust valve is closed at this time. So once it gets down to the bottom and starts going around and coming back up, generally at 25 to 35 degrees before the piston reaches the top dead center, right up to the top, the spark plug fires and ignites the fuel in the air mixture. And this happens when it's on the upstroke to give the flame time to burn, so it doesn't wait till it's all the way to the top to ignite the gases that are in there. If it waited right till the top, it would be too late. So it is igniting the gases while the motor is continuing to push up to top dead center. This creates heat and expands and pressures that push the piston back down again. That's where the power comes from. Once the flame starts and jams that piston, it starts to moving it down. The big heavy crankshafts are big heavy assemblies, and this gets the rotation going and keeps it going through the whole sequence. When the pistons begin to travel downwards and passes through bottom dead center on its way back up, the exhaust valve begins to open. And the pressures in the cylinder created by the fuel having been ignited help to start forcing the burn out the exhaust valve as it starts to come back up. So when the flywheels reach and begin to pass through bottom dead center and are on their way up, the exhaust valve is fully open and the exhaust gases are pushed out through the cylinder, through the exhaust. So the piston is on its way up. It's pushing those exhaust gases out and getting them out of the engine because we don't need them anymore. Now slightly before the piston again reaches top dead center, the intake valve actually begins to open. At this time, both valves are open and they call that valve overlap. The exhaust valve then completely closes and the whole process starts it over again with the fuel being drawn into the intake and down and around, and it keeps going and going and going. This happens very fast as the rotation continues. The crankshaft completes 2 complete revolutions to complete the 4 strokes of the engine to make this happen, while the camshaft is only completing 1 revolution during the same period. The camshaft turns at half the speed of the flywheel assembly. That's why when you look at your motor and you see you have a great big gear on the camshaft and a small gear on the pinion shaft. It's quite obvious to see, and the reason for that is that bottom one is turning twice as fast as the top one. So that keeps them in the right timing. So when we're looking at duration, and which is actually how long both valves are open at the same time, your cam specs will give you the specs on this and your timing, and it'll tell you when the valve will open and when it will close, the intake one first, and then when it will open and when it will close, the exhaust one first. This is figured out on 180 degrees each half, so 360 degrees. So we're going to compare our specs on our EV27 cam to trying to give you an idea of what's happening here. So according to our specs, the EV27 will open the valve at 20 degrees before top dead center. So we're going to mark this in at 20 degrees before top dead center. And it will close at 36 degrees after bottom dead center as it rotates. The exhaust valve will open 46 degrees before top dead center, and it will close 14 degrees after bottom dead center. So now you can see that this is the amount of timing and duration that we have. So in order to calculate our duration, we will take the 20 degrees before top dead center, add the 180 degrees, and then add the 36 degrees after bottom dead center. And that will give us 236 degrees of total duration when the valve is open. For the exhaust valve will open 46 degrees before top dead center. So we'll add that, add the 180 degrees, and add the 14 degrees afterwards, which will give us 240 degrees total duration. As you can see, there's times here when the valves are both open, and that's called valve overlap. That's a time when both valves are open to their maximum opening, and we have to watch out that that doesn't create a problem. Some of that can be done with these numbers here of valve lift at top dead center. And our EV27 cam shows us 182 in the intake and 166 on the exhaust. That is how much the valves are open at that time. So that can help you determine if you're going to hit a piston or the valves are going to collide with each other. Now, just to put the extremity on it, we're going to compare our EV79 cam. The EV79 cam is going to open here at 31 degrees before top dead center, and it's going to close at 55 degrees after bottom dead center. The exhaust valve is going to open at 64 degrees, 64 degrees before top dead center, and it's going to close at about 32 degrees after bottom dead center. So we can calculate the opening again by taking the 31 plus 180 plus the 55, and that will give us 266 degrees. And the exhaust valve opening at 64 plus the 180 plus the 32 gives us 276 degrees of total duration when the valves are open. So the valve overlap is the time when both of the valves are open. Valve overlap here can show you in these numbers what exactly is happening. So when the exhaust valve, when it's exhausting and coming up, and the exhaust valve on our high lift cam is open at 64 degrees, by the time we hit 31 degrees before top dead center, the intake valve opens. Now both of those valves are open, and there is a chance that they could collide with each other. The amount they're open are given in the charts as valve lift top dead center, and that tells you how much both of the valves will be protruding down into the head at that point. Our EV79 cam has 249 on the intake and 250 on the exhaust, while our EV27 cam is only 182 and 166. Although it seems odd that both valves are opening and you're wondering how can the gases come in, these events happen at about 42 times a second. So they happen very fast, and the swirl in there, the air movement in there is controlled by that. So there is an amount of intake coming in when it's still exhausting. It's trying to pull the intake in, because the exhaust valve will finish and close, and the intake valve will continue to open and draw gases into the chamber. So just to give you an idea of a visual comparison, although the valves in our Edelbrock head here are much larger than our valves in the stock, Evolution head. This is a stock Evolution head, and you can see the valves are a lot smaller and spaced farther apart. But we'll just do the numbers to give you an idea of how much difference there is. So we'll say that this goes down 182. That's 100, 50, 60, 70, 60, 70, 80, 2, 82, and the exhaust would be on our EV27 at 166. So we're going to go around 1, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, did I say? 66, 66. So as you can see with the valves there, now we have a lot of clearance in through here, quite a bit. Like approximately what we should be having as distance there. But if we continue to go to the specs for our 79, and we are at 82, so 80, 90, 200, 250, 260 on that one. Whoops, no, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. 249 on that one. 1, 2, and 50. Now you can see where we're at there. Our valves are pretty well hitting each other there. We can't even get this little tiny screwdriver through there, and that is our problem with this head, is that they're both open that much. Although it seems like they might not touch, a little bit of valve float, a slight misadjustment on the push rods, anything like that are going to make these valves hit, which they did. They did tick all these valves and destroyed the other one. So that's what duration means and how long your valves are both open together. So it's very, very important. So I hope that shows you and you understand now about valve duration and how it can have such a big effect on what's happening in your head. The numbers sound great. They sound good to make big power and such, but if you don't look inside there to see what's happening, you won't know. And they rate those ratings in there for a reason, for you to know, and they don't rate them with stock springs, and they tell you use high performance springs or will require head work, and that's what it means. And it means setting the valves back up in the head so that they won't touch, and readjusting the spring pack so the spring pack has the same tension at the installed height. So we're going to do that to this motor and show you how it goes along. One thing to remember, that when you're looking at ratings and such of things, Harley Davidsons tend to be lower horsepower these days, and I know that sounds depressing, but it is the truth. The older motors are rated at higher horsepower, and you could get some pretty good numbers out of them with a minor amount of work. You take an Evolution, for example, put the little EV27 cam in it, a little bit of work to your carburetor and a decent exhaust, you push that thing to 80 horsepower, no problem. But with today's motors and the way they're designed, and because of the EPA regulations and such, they don't have as much horsepower. Your stock horsepower rating on some of them, like a 103 and stuff, is running about 64 horsepower at 5,000 RPM. At lower speeds, it's actually only pushing 45 to 55 horsepower. But it has a lot of torque, and that's what they're made for: two-up driving and torque. Harleys are built for cruising. They're tuned for torque rather than the high-end power. And Harley doesn't even rate them on their sites with horsepower, except when you get into the newer, some of the newer water-cooled ones, actually, like the V-Rods and a Sportster S, and a totally different design that they've come up with. But things like the Sportster S, they're rated at 121 horsepower at 7,500 RPM. Now, you're not going to crank your twin cam up to 7,500 RPM to get those kind of numbers. But it's a relative thing. It's torque versus horsepower, and they're two different animals, and for two different purposes. Your average Evolution 80 was 50 to 60 horsepower, out of the box, stone out of the box. Twin cam 88, 55 to 60 horsepower. A 96 at 60 to 66, and a 103 at 68 to 75. I was sort of shocked the other day when a guy called me and said, well, I want to make a little more power, and I dynoed my 103 and I got a respectable 88 horsepower, and I thought, oh my God, I can get 80 horsepower out of an Evo with a carb and a mild cam. So it seemed like a lot, but the big bore is what counts, and the big bore is what gives you the torque. So that's where, as I said, most Harleys are running between 2,500 and 4,500 RPM, and that's where they make power and big torque. So they always have the advantage of being able to make more power and more torque. You know, the base is there, but you have to think about what they're built for and what you want that bike for. Durations, long duration cams are great for horsepower, such as drag racing and stuff, but you have to be running on the full wide open side and not so much on the streetable side. So you have to decide what you want that motor for. I've seen many motors, you know, that are different. First thing that comes to mind, my personal experience, I found that some of the, like the Ultima 120 motors, boy, they make power, and everybody says, oh, geez, they make power. But as far as being streetable and around town, they're a pretty pernickety motor. The throttle is just so sensitive, and blah, 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 you know, you're hard to control it. You don't have that smooth, nice pull away that you have. But if you're on it, on the top end, man, oh man, they make some power. But you're sacrificing the drivability on the bottom end, you know, for just pure power on the top. So a person has to decide when you go to switch to that and say, well, I'll get a bigger motor, that's what I want, that you may be sacrificing some things on some ends and not on the other, and you may not be pleased with the drivability of it, unless of course your intention was big horsepower, and then you'll be a happy camper. So I hope these things have helped you out. I'm not an expert, I'm just trying to throw my opinions out there, trying to make a couple drawings, and I'm no artist either. But just to try to give you an idea of what the timing and duration is on the cam. So when you look at a cam spec sheet, you have an idea of what it says. When the valve is opening, when it's closing, when those two are both open, and how close they possibly can be coming to hitting each other, or in some applications, actually hitting the piston, depending on the head design. That's why you see a lot of Sportster kits, for example, that are a 1200 upgrade, and when you look inside the piston, it's actually cupped out inside. It's cut out. That's to take care of compression problems and also give room for the valves to open in there because they're opening farther because of different lifts. Now the boys at Hammer, if you want to go fast and you want to make it work and you want to make that Sportster crank, or anything for that matter, Hammer makes a beautiful kit there. I think it's their 275 kit, and those boys down there, they know what they're doing. I had the privilege to deal with them a few times and speak with them a few times, and Aaron and Dan down there were nothing but gracious and gave me as much time as was needed to help me, being the stupid old fella that I am, to understand some of the things and what sort of problems I may run into in what I'm dealing with this 96 head. So I'm ever so gracious and thankful for them. I'm going to put their banner right here, and if you want to check them out, check out their website. It has a lot of information. Some of it's under construction, but there is a lot of information. And if you want to make a Sportster go fast, man, the Hammer kit is the thing for you. So I thank you guys very much for the help, Dan and Aaron down there. It was very much appreciated. So if power is your thing, go for power. You know, go all the way. Be prepared to spend the money. Like I say, horsepower is measured in cubic dollars. It's what it is. It's the horsepower game, be it in motorcycle, cars, or pulling tractor, you name it. Whatever it is, once you start to cut that fine line at the top, things can blow up. Things can happen. Motors, high performance motors like that are made for one purpose, and they're made to go fast, right? But with going fast comes the inevitability of faster wear and less life and cost. Cost. All right. So that's about it with my little bit of knowledge on cams, just to help you get a better feel for things. And when you look at the charts now, you can say, oh, I see that, I understand that, their overlap and the lift, and it'll all sort of make sense to you. So I hope that it's helped some of you out. Subscribe, like, ring the bell. All of it helps us keep this channel going, which we're enjoying very much, and we're enjoying people around the world checking us out. Have a good day. And it's my time, so let's go.